Hello everyone, in this episode I'll be sharing with you my recipe for a Sichuan classic, Mapo Tofu. Now, besides the dish itself, I'm also going to be stir-frying a little bit of asparagus because I wanted a vegetable side dish to go with this. So, with the recipe I'm sharing with you today, the Mapo Tofu, along with one stir-fried vegetable and some rice, perfect for 2 people. I prepared 200 grams of asparagus and soaking it in some boiling water just to cook it through halfway. We'll open up 1 packet of pressed tofu, also known as firm tofu, 300 grams. We'll drain out the excess water. We'll lay it on the side and cut it into 3 slices. And then we'll push it down and cut along the squares to form cubes. The exact size is up to you, but personally, I like to cut them a little bit smaller so that it's easier to flavor them all the way through. Put them into a bowl with a bit of salt. The salt obviously will season the tofu a bit, but mainly it's to get rid of the off smell that tofu sometimes has. Alright? So we're just gonna soak it in that water for a while. We'll also need some dry chilies and Sichuan peppercorns. I'll save those for later. We'll need 2 fresh bird's eye chilies, some pickled ginger, and pickled chilies. That's about 40 grams of garlic. And I'm going to use some for the asparagus and some for the tofu. For the tofu, we'll need about 25 grams of garlic, and for the asparagus, 15 grams. So I've chopped up 40 grams in total, which is about 1 whole head. Alright, no need to chop it too finely. This here is 20 grams of pickled ginger. Just cut it in a few pieces and smash it, and then mince it up as well. If you don't have pickled ginger, you can use fresh ginger and add a bit of vinegar to the sauce later. We'll do the same thing with the fresh chilies, as well as the pickled chilies. We'll slice them up and then just chop them up, mince them, just to extract their spice a little better. The fresh chilies provide more spiciness, whereas the pickled chilies provide, well, a sour taste that balances the heat very well. We'll put all of those into a bowl. At this point, we can drain our tofu, as well as the asparagus. We'll lay the asparagus onto a plate and then dry it with a paper towel because dry vegetables stir fry better than wet ones. We'll prepare 200 grams of beef. Ideally, the beef should have a bit of fat on it because this will make it more aromatic and more flavorful. You can put it in the freezer for about an hour to make it easier to cut. We'll start by cutting the beef into slices, and those slices into strips. Then we'll rotate those strips to mince them up coarsely. Of course, you can use pre-ground beef as well. If you don't like beef, feel free to use pork instead, or I've even seen some people make a vegetarian version where they use mushrooms instead. It's all personal preference. Once you've roughly chopped it into pieces, we'll put them together and smash them up a little bit more. The choice of tofu is also up to you. I'm using firm tofu because it has a better flavor, but soft tofu or silken tofu naturally is softer. So if you prefer a more soft tofu, you can use that. Just keep in mind that it's more easy to break. It breaks more easily, so you'll have to handle the tofu very carefully. Alright? Now I've got some hand-chopped beef, to which I'm going to pour in a bowl, along with a few pieces of spring onions and a little bit of cooking wine. Then we'll add some water so that we can rinse out the myoglobin from the beef. This is especially important to do if you're using frozen meat. Whether it's beef or pork or chicken, as long as it's frozen, you're going to need to rinse it. Fresh beef, however, I like to rinse it as well for the simple fact that it tends to have a smell. Squeeze out all the water, and we've got beef ready. Now get to your wok. We'll turn heat up. We'll turn it to low heat. We're going to be toasting those dry chilies and Sichuan peppercorns. So cut the dry chilies into little pieces. I've got about 5 grams of dried chilies. Now it's very important that you toast them in a wok over low heat, because if the heat is high, you'll definitely burn them. We'll add the peppercorns. That's about 1 teaspoon or 1.5 grams. You can spend about a minute toasting them. You won't need too long. Then pour them into a mortar. And then use the pestle to grind them up. I'm just adding a little bit of salt here just to make it a little bit easier. But that's optional. If you've toasted the chilies properly, they should grind up quite nicely. Don't need to grind them too finely. A coarse grind like this is actually pretty good. We like the texture and the spice it provides. We'll now get back to our wok and heat it up until it's smoking, to which we'll add some, this is duck fat, but you can use lard instead. I'm using this as a substitute for lard, in fact. Or you could just use regular oil, it's up to you. We'll add in our asparagus, and we'll stir fry that. Keep the heat high throughout the whole process. It doesn't take more than a minute to fry, so don't spend too long, otherwise it will lose its crunchiness. We'll add about 15 grams of garlic, and we'll quickly stir that in. Of course, feel free to cook whatever vegetable you like to serve alongside your Mapo Tofu. It's up to you, okay? We'll add a little bit of light soy sauce. That was maybe about a teaspoon. Distribute it evenly into the wok by tossing. Turn the heat off, and we'll finish with a little bit more seasoning. We'll do a pinch of salt, not too much, and a little bit of sugar. That's all we need. The sugar balances out the taste. You can take it off, put it on a plate. We'll add a bit of water to our wok so that we can clean it easily, because we'll need a clean wok to do the next step. Pour out that water. We'll heat up the wok a little bit, and we'll add some more duck fat or lard. It absorbs flavor better than vegetable oil, so I would recommend using lard if you can, but if not, it's fine to use normal oil. We'll add in our beef, and we'll turn up the heat here. We're gonna fry off that beef until we get rid of most of the moisture, because the fragrance and flavor of beef only comes out when you get rid of the moisture. Otherwise it tastes watery. See that? That's the juices from the beef. We don't want that, so we're just gonna scoop that out. You could also just allow it to steam off, but that takes a bit longer. We'll add a bit of dark soy sauce for color. That's about 1 teaspoon. We want the beef to have a nice brown color, because pale colored beef is not very appetizing. We'll add in 25 grams of garlic, as well as our pickled chilies and ginger. And we'll toss to mix everything together. We'll turn the heat down, and we'll add a little bit more duck fat just to get this melting. That was 1 tablespoon of hot raw beef paste or doubanjiang. We'll need to do this over low heat, as otherwise it might burn. But once we've mixed it into the beef and spices, we can safely turn the heat up again. We'll also add some fermented black beans or douchu, about 1 teaspoon of that. Once the meat is fragrant, we'll add some boiled water, 1.5 to 2 cups, just enough to cover the tofu later. We'll add in our tofu, and we'll spread it around. We can switch off the exhaust hood at this point. To balance the taste, we'll add some sugar. We'll also season it with a bit of chicken powder and some white pepper. Boil out a little bit of water, and then add some cornstarch slurry so we can gently thicken that sauce. We'll need to do this a couple times because the tofu will release more water as it cools. So the first one is to get the tofu soft and tender. The second one is where we start thickening the sauce. So you can see that that liquid is starting to get a little thicker and coating the tofu better. So we'll stir that around, and finally we'll thicken it a third time, which will further thicken the sauce. Now, some people prefer less sauce than this. Obviously, you can just add less water. It's all up to personal preference. And then we'll pour this out. We can then garnish this with spring onions and the chili powder that we made earlier. Alternatively, you could fry some of that chili powder together with the spices to make it even more fragrant. So finally, put a little bit of chili powder and spring onions on top of the tofu, and we'll just mix that in. And if you like the color, you can always add more spring onions at the end. I hope you enjoyed this recipe.